Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. You're preparing to open a hatch. On one side, you've got the relative safety of your spacecraft, but on the other, it's just complete, unknown, infinite darkness, a limitless void. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're diving into one of the most tense, awe-inspiring, and honestly, terrifying moments in human history. We're going to look at the story of a man who stepped out of a spaceship and straight into the cosmos, at a time when nobody on Earth actually knew what would happen next.
Seriously, would the absolute vacuum of space instantly crush a human body? That was the literal life or death unknown that scientists were agonizing over back in the early 1960s. Before anyone had ever even attempted a spacewalk, the fears were just monumental. Like, would a person even be able to breathe or stay conscious? And beyond those physical dangers, there was this very real, very deep fear of mind-shattering panic. Could the human brain even process being suspended in endless emptiness without just completely losing its grip on reality?
Well, on March 18, 1965, one man stepped up to answer those terrifying questions. His name was Alexei Leonov, flying aboard the Soviet Voskhod 2 mission. He was about to leave his ship connected to all of humanity by absolutely nothing more than a single 5.35-meter tether. And as we're going to see, what kicked off as humanity's greatest triumph very nearly ended as a completely horrifying disaster in orbit.
Section 1. The space race heats up. The Cold War battle for the cosmos.
To really understand why someone would take this kind of risk, we've got to look at the massive global momentum the Soviets were building at the time. The early 60s were completely defined by this intense, nail-biting rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. In 1957, the Soviets completely shocked the globe with Sputnik 1, the world's first satellite. Then, in 1961, they pulled off the unthinkable when Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit Earth. Every single victory proved technological supremacy, which, translated directly to global influence. So this unrelenting momentum drove Soviet leaders into a desperate push to hit the next impossible milestone before the Americans could, getting a human being to actually walk in space.
Section 2. Preparing for the impossible. The man and the machine. Getting a human outside a spacecraft took an extraordinary combination of the right people and some very experimental tech. So who do you choose for a mission packed with so many deadly unknowns? You choose Alexei Leonov. Born in Siberia in 1934, he actually survived the extreme hardships of Stalin's political purges early in life. And that forged this incredible, deep-seated resilience in him long before he ever dreamed of the stars. He grew up to be a highly skilled fighter pilot with literal nerves of steel and just remarkable composure under pressure. But here's the fascinating part. He was also an artist. He was a guy uniquely capable of seeing profound beauty where most of us would only see paralyzing danger. That specific blend made him the absolute perfect candidate, and he was paired up with veteran commander Pavel Belyaev to fly Voskhod 2.
Now, they were up against a massive engineering challenge. To get Leonov outside without depressurizing the entire ship, which would have killed them both, Voskhod 2 used this revolutionary inflatable airlock. But then there was his gear, the Berkut spacesuit. Back on Earth, this thing weighed nearly 100 kilograms. Now sure, weight doesn't really matter in space, but flexibility absolutely does. And out in the vacuum, this suit was unbelievably stiff, shockingly bulky, and mostly untested in true zero gravity. Leonov trained exhaustively in weightless parabolic flights, aircraft diving out of the sky to simulate zero-G. But honestly, nothing could truly prepare him for the sheer reality of the cosmos.
Section 3. Stepping into the void, leaving the machine behind.
So launch day finally arrives at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The massive rocket violently erupts, blasting Leonov and Belyaev into orbit at a staggering 28,000 kilometers per hour. Once they're up there, the true test begins. The inflatable airlock successfully deploys. Leonov climbs inside, seals the inner hatch behind him, and then he slowly opens that outer hatch. Right in front of him is the infinite blackness of the universe. At exactly 11:34 Moscow time, Alexei Leonov drifts out of the airlock. For the very first time in the history of our species, a human being left their machine behind. He wasn't in a vehicle anymore. He was just in space.
For 12 breathtaking minutes, he just floated out there. Connected only by that single tether, he looked down to see the Earth rotating silently right beneath his feet, this shimmering sphere of brilliant blues, whites, and golds. Sunlight was blazing across the curved horizon, while above him, an endless ocean of stars shone with a kind of clarity no human eye had ever actually witnessed before.
He would later say it was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. And it really was this moment of overwhelming euphoria, a true peak of human exploration. But that profound beauty created a really dangerous false sense of security, because space is utterly merciless.
Section 4. Triumph turns to terror. The vacuum fights back.
That peaceful drifting abruptly ended as the horrifying reality of physics violently kicked in. Out in the vacuum, Leonov's spacesuit began to expand. It inflated way, way beyond anything the engineers back on Earth had predicted. His arms and legs became completely rigid. His gloves pulled right away from his fingers, hardening so much he couldn't even bend his hands. He was practically paralyzed. And then, the ultimate terror hit him. Looking back at the airlock he had just floated out of, the opening that was totally fine a few minutes ago now looked impossibly small. He couldn't fit back inside. He was completely stranded outside his spacecraft, and Mission Control was down there watching, completely helpless. Leonov knew his oxygen was running out. Every single second mattered. So against all his strict training, he executes a highly forbidden survival maneuver. First, he manually opens a valve to bleed oxygen out of his suit to shrink it down, knowing full well he was risking lethal decompression sickness, the bends. Next, as the suit slightly deflates, he totally ditches the plan of going in feet first. He improvises and literally dives headfirst into that incredibly cramped airlock. And finally, once he's inside that tiny little tube, he has to physically, exhaustingly twist his entire body around in zero gravity just to reach the outer hatch and pull it closed. This desperate fight for his life took an absolutely extreme toll on his body. Leonov's heart rate spiked to nearly 180 beats per minute. His core body temperature skyrocketed. Sweat was pouring down his face so fast it started filling his helmet and blinding him. He was on the absolute razor's edge of total physical collapse before he finally, miraculously, managed to pull that hatch shut and seal it tight. He survived the vacuum.
Section 5. Surviving the Siberian Wilderness, Earth's Final Deadly Challenge.
Now, just when you think the danger is finally over and these guys can go home as heroes, a massive, catastrophic twist happens during their descent. The nightmare didn't end in space. It followed them all the way down. The spacecraft's automatic landing system completely failed. Commander Belyaev had to immediately take over, pulling off the very first manual re-entry in Soviet history. Because of the malfunction, their capsule slammed into the Earth hundreds of kilometers off target, landing deep in a remote, freezing Siberian forest. So get this, the men who literally just survived the vacuum of space now found themselves trapped in deep snow, in brutally freezing temperatures, surrounded by roaming wolves and bears. Rescue teams couldn't reach them right away. They had to endure 2 freezing nights out in the wilderness before ski troops and helicopters could finally pull them out. Earth really just threw one final, brutal test at them. Section 6. Opening the Universe, a legacy extending beyond the Cold War. This single mission changed everything. It permanently altered the trajectory of human history. Leonov's success in March 1965 proved that working outside a spacecraft wasn't just some crazy sci-fi dream. It was actually doable. That breakthrough lit a fire under the Americans, who then successfully pulled off their first spacewalk with Ed White just 3 months later in June. Fast forward a decade to 1975, and we really get to see Leonov's ultimate legacy. He commanded the Soviet side of the Apollo-Soyuz test project. For the first time ever, American and Soviet spacecraft docked together in orbit. Former rivals were literally shaking hands in the vacuum of space, totally shifting the global narrative from fierce Cold War competition to extraordinary human cooperation.
And honestly, the impact this had on science and exploration is immeasurable. Just think about what we do in space today. We're repairing vital satellites like the Hubble Space Telescope. We're assembling orbital laboratories. The entire construction of the massive International Space Station, paving the way for future habitats on the Moon and missions to Mars. Absolutely none of these modern achievements would have been possible without spacewalks. Every single astronaut who ventures outside a spacecraft today owes a huge debt to Alexei Leonov, the guy who proved humans could survive and work in the harshest environment imaginable.
All of this leaves us with one really profound question to think about. If one man, armed with immense courage and some incredibly quick thinking, hadn't risked absolutely everything on a single 5.35-meter tether, how long would the door to the universe have stayed closed? Alexei Leonov ventured into the infinite void, faced down a disaster that absolutely should have killed him, and returned to turn science fiction into reality. He didn't just walk in space. He opened the door for all of humanity to follow. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking up.